Hello, Lars. Thanks for joining us on Smarter Markets at IETA's North America Climate Summit 2023.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I wanted to get your perspective because, at Allied Offsets in the carbon space, you're the data provider. You're where people go to find the information to try to understand these markets. And I was hoping you could kind of walk us through how you see your role in the carbon markets and perhaps how that's been evolving over the past few years.
Yeah, I'll say, first of all, we're not the only ones that would say that, but I think we're the only ones that are right. But the market's evolved tremendously. A lot of things have happened. A lot of new players have come in, particularly in the rating space. A lot of the project developers and everyone talks transparency, but what we've seen is, ever since we got involved with the market, is amazing amount of information asymmetry. Lots of bits and pieces of information everywhere. No one knows what the price is. No one knows where to get the credits, who the brokers are, what the ratings companies are talking about. And because of the kind of, mainly because of the corporate background we had, we felt we were really well positioned to put all that together and do it as one big offering, almost like a mini Bloomberg for this space, if you will.
And how have you found it's being received?
I mean, tremendously well. We're really happy with the progress. I think, particularly at a time of great controversy in the space, the certain data doesn't lie. It is what it is. And if you can present a lot of data in one place from a bunch of different sources in a way that people can draw their own conclusions on the basis of it, that's a good service, and that's what we try to do.
And I wanted to ask you about the controversies because this year's had a number of challenges and controversies in the carbon markets, from the compliance markets, where this is the challenge of operationalizing the Article 6 markets, and then in the voluntary carbon markets, where there's been challenges to the reputation and quality and legitimacy of certain projects. And I think your data's been used in some of those as well.
Absolutely. Well, I always say the data is what it is. Look, I think in general, the way I feel about the voluntary market is that as part of selling a credit, you got to actually be able to prove to people that when you sell someone something that's a ton of carbon, it's got to be able to be demonstrably so. And if the space can't handle criticism, then that's not great for the space. And I think particularly some of the early criticism, there was some legitimacy and some mea culpa on part of the space. Some of the historic credits probably not worth nearly as much as they were said to be worth at the time. But I also think the space has increasingly come together to address those concerns. I think my personal view is that we're probably nearing the bottom of that market. Yesterday there was another article in The Guardian using our data. We were quoted, and so half the people at this conference think, well, they can think of us what they want, but they say basically, did you do that? Did you write that research? And the answer is no, we didn't, but our data was the background for it. We've had other cases where also The Guardian have written about some corporate initiatives for other clients of ours. So we've been on both sides of the data issue. But again, they at least agree what they're looking at. And then the conclusions they draw from that can be vastly different. But the data is very important, right? That's the backbone
Absolutely.
of it.
And I'm curious, when you look at, when you're going through the process of assembling the data that is available, are there certain types of data where you look and say, if we had this type of information available, that would really help with the transparency, with the trust, with understanding that you're getting what you think you're getting?
It depends a lot on the type of project you're talking about. Okay. I think the ratings folks have a very, very important role to play, but there are many of them, multiple of them, and they don't always agree. So that can be a little disheartening when you see very well-known projects and, without mentioning names, well-known ratings agencies. One says this is A star and the other says this is an F. I mean, sometimes quite literally. Then I don't blame buyers for saying, well, what should I believe? And what should I pay? So I think over time that will hopefully harmonize. I think sometimes they don't communicate a lot. I think the space has particularly had an issue historically with price. There isn't one central price source. This is I think this isn't an exchange model. This is more an eBay model for what this space is. We spend a lot of time getting very clever on price. So we get prices on projects and ventures from a large number of brokers, and we put that into various models to have estimated prices for all the projects, which is, I think, one of the services that our clients like a lot, because at least you want to know what you're sort of paying the right price. The other thing I think people like a lot is what information on who has bought what, which corporate has retired which credit, when and where, and how much money that they spend. That's important because, well, first of all, how does that hold up against their claims? How does that, if you're a broker and you're trying to sell a certain type of credit, it's kind of useful to know who has bought that type of credit in the past. Yeah, so there's a lot of use cases where this kind of information is useful for players in this space. We also see it a lot for consulting firms, ESG reports, and so forth.
Great. And I wanted to ask you, because at conferences like this, other than some people might have strong words for you, it's one of the really interesting things is being able to share ideas outside the panels, in the hallways, in the meeting rooms. And I was curious if there were any ideas you wanted to share, you came here wanting to talk with people about, or any ideas that came up over the past few days that you think are really important and you want to take with you.
I think something we try to do is, well, keep in mind, if you're trying to be Bloomberg, you have to be very open to any kind of new ideas or new ways of showing the data. I think there's particularly movements in the geospatial areas. One area, if you take nature-based solutions, the mapping of areas opens Pandora's box of what data you can layer on top of that, maybe even including biodiversity or fires or things like that, that doesn't have to be difficult once you've mapped all of these areas. So it's almost, think of it as like almost an operating system that you can put a lot of stuff into. So I think particularly that area, we're going to see some movement going forward. I think particularly in this, it's perhaps less prevalent here now, but in the CDR space, carbon dioxide removal, there's a huge move because the space doesn't suffer from the reputational issues that the VCM has. And I think particularly for like at a conference like this, there are very few corporates. Yeah. So, but if you had a CDR event, there'd be far more corporates because they feel they can't miss out. They can't not know. Like, because it's sort of the future. It's the, where the very large solutions may come from one day, even if the prices now are incredibly high. Then the volumes are incredibly low, but no one doesn't think that's going to be vastly different 5 years from now. So I'd say particularly in those two areas, I'd say perhaps more CDR, there's tremendous movement. We're trying to have the data reflect that.
Okay. And last question I wanted to ask you was, everyone's talking about how important it is to scale, how we need to move quickly. Is there something that you're seeing either on the standard side or with the technology, tools, data, that should be the next thing that we really work on? That's kind of the critical thing to get right if we want to continue to have these markets grow quickly.
Well, I think so. I'm slightly a bit more of a pessimist there than most. If you look at the process it takes to create a project, so you think of like typical supply demand. Right? I think near term this is very much a demand-driven space because you can't go out and create a project overnight and generate a bunch of issued credits. You can very quickly change a corporate's perspective on whether they should be in this market or not. That happens overnight. The supply doesn't happen overnight. And a lot of these projects, they take sometimes 18 months, 2 years to put together. So I don't think the scalability there is great. And also there are only so many places in the world you can have these nature-based solutions, especially if you got to have higher standards for and better information, integration of local population, and so forth. Again, I think the CDR space is interesting because another term for it is engineered solutions. Okay. Some of these are at the wrong price and at the wrong volumes, but if both those things change, the scale can be incredible. For example, I'm involved with the Institute of Carbon Management. They have one project which is dry CO2 from salt water, basically. And it requires sun. And if there's two things this world has enough of, it's salt water and sun. So imagine just for a second that they could get those credits done at a low enough price that made sense to the world. Absurdly as it sounds, we've essentially priced climate change. Like just to say that they could do that at $10 a ton. Well, now you could do unlimited amounts at $10 a ton. Unfortunately, the price is more like $500 a ton. So we're some way away. But the point is, if we keep looking at these scalable engineered solutions, CDR, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the massive breakthroughs come from that area.
All right. Well, I'll be looking forward to that. Thanks so much for dropping by. It was great to be able to catch up with you.
Likewise. Thanks.